We're here discussing the nomination of the next potential Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. And of course, that job, as we all know, is probably the second most difficult job in the country. He presides over the welfare of 3.4 million people in active service, in active reserve, all around the world. He presides over a budget of $850 billion. The person who has that position has to be a preeminent strategic thinker. How do we modernize our Navy? How do we recruit in the modern world? How do we maintain force preparedness? How do we cement strategic alliances? It's a job that you can't just show up and start doing. There has to be behind it a lifetime experience that gives you some capacity to be able to do all these things and respond to the emergencies that inevitably arise when you get that phone call at 3 in the morning. There's been a lot of discussion by my colleagues about the lack of experience of Mr. Hegseth. I share that concern. There's been a lot of discussion about his views on women in the military. Our own distinguished Senator Tammy Duckworth is the most preeminent example of the capacity of women to serve effectively and bravely. Mr. Hegseth has repudiated his well-founded and long-standing view that he's against women in the military. Frankly, it sounds to me like a nomination eve consideration. I'm speaking, of course, to you, Mr. President. I really respect the military service that you've provided to our country. But the big concern I have about him, in addition to the character issues, the experience issues, the drinking issues, and by the way, I'm puzzled at his assertion that if he gets the job, he'll stop drinking. Why wait? But here's the concern I have. Unlike you, Mr. President, I did not serve in the military. My draft lottery number was high. This is during Vietnam, and I wasn't drafted. Many of my college classmates were. They served in Vietnam. Some of them came home injured. Some did not come home. And I think about them every day and how it is that they served. Some were badly injured, and some died. But when I think about the situation most Americans are in, most of us didn't serve. But all of us who didn't serve are so indebted to those who did. My high school classmates, the young people I see now volunteering to go into the military. So we, as Americans, have a profound obligation to honor the service of those who volunteer to respond to the call of the commander-in-chief who says, you're going to be deployed. They don't know where. They're not involved in the discussion whether. They're not involved in a discussion when. They show up. And our democracy so profoundly depends on the idealism of young people who are willing to subject themselves to the decisions of the commander-in-chief. And I believe, Mr. President, that every one of us here who's involved in the decisions about authorizing the use of military force have an absolutely profound obligation to do that with care, because the folks who are going to do the work and be in harm's way are going to be there because we sent them there. So it's why I've been so insistent, as many of us here, that we have to have a good VA. We have to have medical care for our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. But what we need, too, is a Secretary of Defense who honors that idealism of these young Americans who decide to enlist. And that idealism is born in a sense of common commitment, a sense of wanting to do something for the common good. And it's also to live by the code of military conduct. There is great honor in our services. And those men and women who I so admire know they may have to use lethal force to defend our values, to defend our country, to protect their fellow soldiers. But they know there's limits. And they use it when they must, but never more than that. And by the way, that is asking a lot of our soldiers to be restrained when they're in a combat zone and can be killed themselves. So what distresses me so much about Mr. Hegseth is how he used his very powerful forum on Fox TV, in my view, to dishonor the soldiers who acted with restraint, in valor, in integrity, by taking up the cause of some of our soldiers. There's not many of them, but they do exist, who killed people, who use violence, not in furtherance of our defense, but for their own reasons. And I'm speaking about Mr. Lawrence. Clint Lawrence was a soldier. He was sent in 2012 as a new commander without combat experience to lead a platoon of young soldiers that were deployed to Afghanistan with the mission of defeating the local Taliban and winning over the area's population. Incredibly hard task. But one day, for reasons Mr. Lawrence, then soldier Lawrence, knew, he threatened to kill a farmer and his son, a 3 or 4 year old boy. And a day later, he ordered his men to shoot within inches of unarmed villagers. That was including near children. And he said, "It's funny watching the villagers dance." Mr. Lawrence's men, who were the honorable, brave, I'm willing to be in harm's way, I'm willing to act like a warrior, but I'm not ever willing to kill indiscriminately. They balked at his orders. And you know how hard that is to do if you're a soldier, when you're given an order, even if you know it's the wrong order. Then they were told to make false reports about taking fire from a village to justify this conduct, and they refused to do it. The next day, Lawrence ordered fire on unarmed Afghans over 100 yards from the platoon. They were killed. He radioed in a false report claiming the bodies couldn't be reached. The people I honor are the people under his command who refused to take those orders. The people I honor are soldiers whose bravery extends not just to putting their own physical well-being in harm's way, but who maintain that commitment to the ideals of the military code of conduct that gives us the standing and legitimacy that is so important to our well-being. So my problem is this. I want a Secretary of Defense who's as good as the soldiers he leads. Mr. Hegseth, in my view, fails to meet that standard. I yield back.